When 17-year-old Alina Rahman boarded the weathered white research vessel off the coast of Florida that July morning, the only thing she was worried about was whether the dolphins would come close enough for her to touch. She had been talking about this trip for months, an outreach program run by a small marine research station where high school volunteers could spend 2 weeks assisting real scientists with dolphin behavioral studies. The sun was already sharp and blinding over the calm turquoise water. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries cutting through the steady thrum of the boat's twin engines. A faint smell of diesel mixed with the salty tang of the ocean. The volunteers, 8 in total, clustered along the deck rail, shaded by baseball caps, sunglasses, and sunscreen-thickened faces. Alina was the youngest. She wore her hair in a long braid down her back, a faded Save Our Oceans t-shirt, and the thin silver bracelet her grandmother had given her before the trip. She kept her phone zipped away in her bag. One of the rules here was to keep your eyes on the water, not your screen. The lead researcher, Dr. Karen Holt, briefed them as the boat cut further from shore. "We're tracking a pod of bottlenose dolphins we've been studying for over 6 years. Some are tagged, some are not. We'll be taking photos, noting markings and logging behavior. If they approach, stay calm. Never reach over the rail without one of us with you." Her tone carried the authority of someone who had given this talk many times, but her eyes were warm. Alina noticed how Karen glanced out at the horizon every few seconds, scanning, like she could feel where the dolphins were before anyone else could see them. By mid-morning, the first dorsal fins appeared, sharp arcs slicing the surface. Gasps went up along the deck. Cameras clicked. The dolphins surfaced in pairs and trios, she breathing in sharp rhythmic bursts, then vanishing again under the glassy water. Alina gripped the rail, leaning forward without realizing it. They were so close, close enough to see the ripple of muscle under smooth, wet skin. One in particular caught her eye, larger than the others, with a jagged scar down its left side, just behind the dorsal fin. "That's Atlas," said one of the grad students, crouching beside her with a clipboard. "Male, about 30 years old. Well, we keep an eye on him. Bit unpredictable." Unpredictable. The word lodged somewhere in the back of her mind. They trailed the pod for hours, recording sightings, logging GPS coordinates, and snapping hundreds of high-resolution photographs. The mood on board was light, even giddy. Everyone was flush with the thrill of being so near these wild, intelligent creatures. By early afternoon, the heat had deepened. The water glittered, flat and endless. Some of the dolphins drew nearer, riding the bow wave. A few leapt clear of the surface, twisting midair before crashing back in a spray of white foam. It was during one of these moments, when everyone's attention was on the arc of a leaping calf, that someone noticed Alina was no longer at the rail. At first, no one panicked. She might have gone to refill her water bottle or ducked into the shade, but minutes ticked by, and she didn't reappear. Her backpack still sat on the bench where she'd left it, the zipper open, her phone and notebook inside. "Alina?" Dr. Holt's voice carried across the deck. No answer. They searched the small vessel quickly, every corner, the cabin, the galley, the narrow stern platform. She was nowhere. By the time the captain cut the engines, the mood had shifted from confusion to something else, something heavy and rising. The ocean around them looked exactly the same as it had a moment before, but it felt different now. The first call to the Coast Guard was made at 2:17 p.m. Coordinates given. Situation explained. Search initiated. For the next 4 hours, they crisscrossed the same stretch of water, while other vessels joined in. A patrol boat, then a helicopter sweeping low, the thump of its blades beating over the waves. The sun began to fall. No trace of her was found, not a splash, not a sound, not a single floating scrap of clothing or gear. That night, the volunteers sat in the marina conference room, faces pale and drawn under the fluorescent lights. The Coast Guard officers asked their questions, one by one, then again, circling back. Who last saw her? What was she doing? Did she seem upset? Did she slip? Did anyone hear a scream? No one could give them what they wanted. Dr. Holt kept replaying the moment in her mind. The pod moving close. The scarred male dolphin, Atlas, rolling just beneath the surface, his dark eye flashing up toward the boat. Then the space where Alina had been standing, empty. By the time the search was officially suspended 3 days later, theories had splintered into 2 camps. The first, that she'd fallen overboard and been swept under before anyone noticed. The second, whispered only among a few, that one of the dolphins, maybe Atlas, had something to do with it. But that second theory was dismissed almost as soon as it surfaced. Dolphins weren't known to harm humans. They were the friendly ones, the smiling ones. Still, in the days after, a strange quiet seemed to settle over the research station. Atlas was spotted again, but the sighting logs were sparse. No one seemed eager to get too close. It would be almost 9 months before the real clue surfaced, and when it did, it came not from the ocean, but from an unexpected place. A veterinary facility's large animal X-ray machine, and the dark, unmistakable silhouette of something trapped deep inside a living creature. The late morning crowd had begun to gather near the sprawling dolphin tank. Children clutched paper cones of popcorn, parents juggled cameras, and the air was heavy with the mingled scents of salt water and fried food from the nearby snack bar. Zoe leaned against the railing, her phone in one hand, watching the dolphins dart and twist under the surface. The water glinted with sharp flashes of silver as the animals passed, their smooth bodies breaking the surface for air before slipping back into the depths. One in particular caught her attention, a large female named Narina, recognizable by a faint scar near her dorsal fin. The trainer, a tall woman in a wetsuit named Riley, called out instructions over a microphone, coaxing Narina to leap, spin, and splash the front rows of the audience. From the outside, it looked like a perfectly orchestrated tourist spectacle. But Zoe noticed something different in Narina's behavior. A kind of restless circling, a low chuffing sound through her blowhole, and frequent glances toward the deeper end of the tank, where shadows pooled. By the time the show ended, most of the crowd had dispersed toward the souvenir shop. Zoe lingered. She had been coming to this aquarium since she was a child, but something about the way Narina moved was unsettling. It was almost as if the dolphin was guarding something. Her best friend, Lena Ortiz, joined her at the railing. "You're zoning out again," Lena teased, handing Zoe a bottle of water. "If you stare at them long enough, you're going to start thinking they're trying to talk to you." Zoe smirked, but didn't look away. "What if they are?" Before Lena could reply, Narina surged upward in a sudden, sharp movement. Not a playful jump, but a forceful thrust toward the surface. The trainer whistled, trying to redirect her, but the dolphin slapped her tail against the water, creating a spray that drenched the front row of the next group, shuffling in for the afternoon show. Zoe frowned. "That wasn't normal." Lena shrugged. "Maybe she's just in a mood. Animals have moods, you know." But Zoe's eyes stayed fixed on the spot where Narina had surfaced. For the briefest second she thought she'd seen something else, a pale shape, caught in the sunlight, sinking slowly toward the deeper section of the tank. She almost told Lena, but the thought felt too strange to voice. Later that afternoon, the two of them wandered into the small behind-the-scenes viewing corridor. Few visitors knew it existed, a dimly lit hallway with a long, thick glass panel offering a side view into the dolphin tank's deeper section. Most of the dolphins stayed near the surface or mid-water, but Narina was there, lingering in the dim blue gloom. She turned sideways, almost pressing her flank to the glass, her dark eye staring directly at Zoe. Something about that look made Zoe's stomach tighten. It wasn't the vacant curiosity of a wild animal. It was deliberate, intent. And then, Narina did something unexpected. She opened her mouth slightly, letting a stream of bubbles escape, and in that brief gap Zoe saw it. A small, crumpled strip of fabric caught between her teeth, fluttering in the current before disappearing back inside. Zoe's breath caught. She stepped closer, pressing her hands against the glass. "Lena, did you see?" But Lena was already glancing at her phone, distracted. "What?" "Nothing," Zoe muttered. She didn't know why she didn't tell her right then. Maybe because it sounded insane, a dolphin carrying fabric in its mouth like some kind of trophy. Still, as they left the corridor, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she'd seen was important. That night, Zoe lay awake replaying the moment in her mind. The aquarium had been part of the city for decades, but there were rumors. Stories about a girl who had vanished there years ago. No proof, just whispers from the staff who'd worked there long enough to remember. The thought made her uneasy. She pulled out her laptop, searching for old news archives. After a few minutes of scrolling, she found it. A 17-year-old girl named Marissa Kay now went missing at the aquarium 8 years ago. Witnesses last saw her walking near the dolphin tank during a crowded summer afternoon. Her body was never found. Zoe's pulse quickened. It was probably a coincidence, she told herself. But then she remembered the shape she'd seen sinking in the water earlier and the strip of fabric between Narina's teeth. The next morning, Zoe returned to the aquarium alone. She bought a day pass and stayed near the dolphin tank for hours, watching the animals cycle through training, feeding, and rest. Narina avoided the group, keeping mostly to the shadows. Several times Zoe thought she saw something odd in the dolphin's mouth. Flashes of color, quick movements. Finally, just before closing, Riley the trainer led Narina into the medical pool for a checkup. Zoe, standing at the public viewing area, caught a glimpse of the dolphin as she rolled on her side under the trainer's hand. For an instant, Zoe saw a faint lump in her midsection, slightly distorting her normally sleek shape. She didn't know much about marine biology, but she knew enough to recognize that something foreign was inside. She stepped back from the glass, heart pounding. It was a ridiculous, terrifying thought. But what if Narina had swallowed something she shouldn't have? Something that didn't belong in a dolphin's body. Something that explained why she'd been acting so strangely. The marine research facility was eerily quiet that Tuesday morning. Normally, the dolphin tanks echoed with a chorus of whistles and splashes, but today, even the ocean seemed muted. Dr. Elaine Foster, the facility's lead marine biologist, walked briskly down the corridor toward the veterinary wing. Her phone was still buzzing with calls from journalists, each trying to get a comment about the sudden and mysterious shutdown of the dolphin show. She ignored them all. Hing was wrong, terribly wrong, and she couldn't explain it yet. 2 days earlier, the dolphin named Mira had been acting strangely. Instead of her usual playful flips and smooth dives, she lingered at the far end of the pool, circling slowly, almost protectively, as if guarding something unseen. The trainers thought she might be ill. Her appetite was irregular. She avoided interaction, and every so often she let out deep, almost mournful sounds. Elaine had insisted on a full medical examination. Mira was a prized performer and one of the most intelligent dolphins in their care. But she was also unpredictable. Rescued from a commercial fishing net 3 years earlier, she had survived injuries, adapted miraculously, and formed an unusually close bond with a handful of trainers. One of those trainers had been 19-year-old Emily Rhodes, the girl who vanished 2 weeks ago. The police search had led nowhere. No signs of struggle. No security footage beyond the last image of Emily walking toward the dolphin tanks late at night. Her shoes were found neatly placed near the pool's edge, but her clothes, bag, and body were gone. Rumors had swirled about her possibly running away, but everyone who knew her swore she would never abandon her family or her work. Elaine opened the heavy metal door to the veterinary wing, where the team had just finished sedating Mira for a diagnostic scan. In the corner, the X-ray machine hummed softly, processing the digital images. Dr. Luis Ortega, the veterinarian, stood by with a furrowed brow. "Is she stable?" Elaine asked, slipping into her gloves. "Vitals are good," Luis replied, "but you'll want to see this." He gestured toward the monitor, where the first X-ray image had loaded. Elaine leaned closer, expecting to see an obstruction, perhaps a swallowed fishhook or piece of debris. Instead, her breath caught in her throat. Inside Mira's abdominal cavity, among the ghostly shapes of her ribs and spine, there was something that didn't belong. The outline was faint but disturbingly clear. A cylindrical shape, metal, lichen parts, with smaller fragments scattered around it. "What is that?" she whispered. Luis zoomed in, adjusting the contrast. "It's not bone, it's not food. And look, these smaller pieces, they're too uniform to be natural." Elaine stared harder, her mind racing. She'd seen dolphins swallow plastic bottles before, even cameras dropped by careless tourists. But this... Then it hit her. The cylindrical shape wasn't just random metal, it had grooves, threading, a cap, and just below it, faintly visible, was another object, thin, curved with evenly spaced ridges. "Oh my God." Elaine's voice trembled. "That looks like a wristwatch strap." Luis glanced at her sharply. "You think?" "Yes," she cut him off. "Emily had a stainless steel water bottle. She carried it everywhere, and she wore a digital sports watch with a ribbed strap. That's what this is." The room went silent. For a moment, Elaine could hear nothing but the hum of the machine and the slow, steady beeping of Mira's heart monitor. "If this is inside her," Luis said carefully, "then how did it get there?" They both knew the implication. Dolphins are known for carrying objects in their mouths, sometimes swallowing them accidentally. But Mira had never ingested anything of this size in all her years at the facility. And then there was the darker thought neither wanted to voice. If those items belonged to Emily, then Mira had somehow been in close contact with her during or after her disappearance. "Could it have been washed in from the ocean?" Luis asked weakly. "She could have found it after—" "No," Elaine said firmly. "These items are intact enough to have been swallowed recently. Saltwater erosion would have changed their appearance. This happened here in the last 2 weeks." Luis hesitated. "We'll need to perform an ultrasound to see if there's anything else." The ultrasound confirmed it. Amid the shifting gray shapes inside Mira's stomach, a more chilling object appeared, a small plastic ID badge, bent and warped by digestive fluids but still legible in parts. The facility's logo was unmistakable, and though the name was partially obscured, enough of the letters could be read. "Emily Rhodes," Elaine whispered, her eyes burning. Luis stepped back, visibly shaken. "We have to call the police." Elaine nodded, but her hands trembled as she reached for the phone. The logical part of her mind tried to piece it together. Had Emily fallen into the water? Was Mira trying to save her? Or had something gone horribly wrong during an interaction? Could a dolphin, even one as gentle as Mira, have caused harm, accidentally or otherwise? But then another possibility slithered into her thoughts, one that chilled her to her core. What if Emily had been deliberately placed in the tank? The phone rang twice before the detective on the case, Sergeant Mason Hale, answered. "We have something," Elaine said without preamble. "We scanned Mira. She has several of Emily's personal items in her stomach." There was a stunned pause on the line. "You're telling me the Dolphin has evidence of the victim inside her?" "Yes, and I don't think it's accidental." Within the hour, Mason arrived at the facility, accompanied by 2 officers and a forensics photographer. They documented every scan, every image. Mira remained under sedation, her sleek gray body floating gently in the shallow examination pool, oblivious to the storm her X-ray had unleashed. Elaine stood back, watching the professionals work. She wanted to protect Mira. She owed the animal her life, her career. But she also couldn't deny what she had seen. The world outside these walls would tear the story apart, the media turning it into something monstrous. Dolphin eats missing girl. And yet she couldn't stop wondering, if Mira did have these items, what else might be hidden in the depths of the tank, or in the memories of this intelligent creature who couldn't speak but might still hold the truth. By the time the police left, night had fallen over the facility. The ocean beyond the tanks was a dark, endless expanse, the waves whispering secrets no one could fully hear. Elaine stayed by Mira's side until the sedation wore off. The Dolphin's eyes opened slowly, meeting hers with a gaze so deep and unblinking it felt almost human. "Tell me what happened," Elaine murmured, but the only reply was the soft ripple of water as Mira slowly swam away. The footage from that day would become both a comfort and a curse for the people who loved her. In the weeks after her disappearance, it was played over and over, by the aquarium staff, by investigators, by her family, and later by strangers on the internet who analyzed every frame. The video began innocently enough. The girl, 19-year-old Marissa Dale, stood at the edge of the dolphin pool wearing the faded wetsuit she'd used during her internship. She was smiling, her hair tucked into a loose ponytail, leaning over to speak softly to one of the dolphins. That dolphin, an older female named Azure, was known for being unusually social, even clingy, with certain trainers. Marissa had been her favorite. Visitors often commented on the way Azure followed her every movement, responding to her voice even from across the pool. It was supposed to be a simple, routine swim, one Marissa had done dozens of times before. The timestamp in the corner of the video read 2:14 p.m. when she slid into the water. She adjusted her mask, dipped under briefly, then surfaced next to Azure. The dolphin swam close, brushing against her side in what looked like an affectionate nudge. For the next 4 minutes, they circled the pool together. Marissa seemed calm, relaxed, occasionally glancing toward the trainers on the deck, but something subtle shifted at 2:19 p.m. Azure suddenly broke from the pattern, diving deep and then shooting up beneath Marissa with a burst of speed. Marissa laughed at first, the kind of laugh that comes from surprise, but her expression changed when Azure didn't resurface immediately. In the background, another dolphin whistled, sharp, rapid bursts, a sound the trainers would later admit they'd never heard from them during a swim. At 2:21 p.m., Marissa dove, following Azure into the deeper section of the pool, and that was the last time she was seen above water. The remaining footage showed ripples spreading across the pool's surface, small shadows moving beneath, and then stillness. Trainers rushed forward, scanning the water for movement. One threw in a rescue line, but it floated untouched. The pool's filtration pumps continued their low mechanical hum, the only sound until someone shouted, "Call 911." When divers entered the water less than 2 minutes later, they found nothing, not a single trace of Marissa. The pool was sealed, drained halfway, and searched. Still nothing. The police reports would later note how improbable it was, physically impossible, some claimed, for someone to vanish in a contained environment without leaving a single piece of clothing, equipment, or hair behind. Her mother, Dana, sat through those replays with a kind of hollow patience. "I kept thinking I'd see something everyone else missed," she said later. Some movement in the corner, a shadow, a hand breaking the surface. But there was nothing. Nothing. Online speculation took a life of its own. Some viewers slowed the video frame by frame, claiming they could see Azure pulling Marissa down. Others swore there was another shape in the depths, something larger than a dolphin, something that didn't belong in the pool. The aquarium officially denied both theories. They explained that Azure had been examined immediately afterward, and no signs of aggression were recorded. They also dismissed the other shape as a distortion caused by light refraction. But the rumors only grew. One post, shared tens of thousands of times, claimed to have insider information that security footage from another angle, one not released to the public, showed Azure behaving erratically in the days before Marissa's disappearance. The aquarium refused to comment. The investigation stalled quickly. Police could not treat the incident as a criminal case without evidence of foul play, but they also couldn't close it without a plausible explanation. The official file labeled it as a missing person, presumed drowned. But presumed wasn't enough for Dana. She stayed in the city long after the media had lost interest, visiting the aquarium every few days. Sometimes she stood by the dolphin pool for hours, just watching Azure. The trainers noticed it too, how Azure would come to the edge when Dana appeared, pressing her head against the side of the pool, exhaling in slow, deliberate bursts. "Almost like she was trying to say something," one trainer admitted. 6 months later, the first strange break in the case came not from police, but from a veterinarian working at the aquarium. The dolphins were scheduled for their annual health scans, routine X-rays and ultrasounds to check for internal injuries, parasites, or swallowed objects. When it was Azure's turn, the vet noticed something unusual on the screen. There was a faint, irregular shadow in her abdominal cavity, not a medical concern but large enough to be noted. At first they assumed it was debris, a piece of rope, a toy from the enrichment sessions, maybe even a scrap from the pool's filtration system. Dolphins sometimes swallowed foreign objects, and they usually passed harmlessly. But this shape didn't look like a toy. It had sharper edges, and the X-ray seemed to show two distinct parallel lines, too uniform to be natural. The vet decided to run the scan twice. The image was the same. The object remained inside Azure for months. It didn't move much, and she showed no signs of distress. The aquarium decided against surgical removal, fearing it would be too risky. They logged the finding in her health records, marked it as non-threatening, and moved on. But Dana found out. One of the junior staff, who had grown sympathetic to her, quietly told her about the X-ray. Dana didn't react at first. She just stood there, gripping the strap of her bag, eyes fixed on the pool. Then she whispered, "It's hers, isn't it?" The staff member didn't answer. Dana began showing up even more frequently after that, always focusing on Azure. She'd talk to the Dolphin in a low, steady voice, as if coaxing her to the surface with words alone. By the 1-year mark, Marissa's case had faded from headlines entirely, but for the people who had seen that X-ray, the shadow inside Azure was impossible to forget. Some thought it was a fragment of Marissa's wetsuit buckle. Others, more disturbingly, believed it was part of her dive belt, something she'd been wearing the day she vanished. The official investigation never reopened, but Dana was already making her own plans. She'd found a marine biologist willing to help her, someone with access to portable scanning equipment. If she could just get close enough, maybe she could see for herself what Azure was hiding. And maybe, after all this time, she could finally learn what happened beneath the surface that day. The local marine facility was quiet that morning, a low mist rolling over the water like a slow-moving shroud. Maya hadn't slept. Not really. She had spent the night replaying the moment in her mind. The moment the dolphin had brushed past her in the water, the way its dark eyes had lingered a little too long, the strange sensation that something in the animal was different. It was more than grief for her missing friend now. It was suspicion, sharp and cold. Dr. Koenig had called her at dawn. "They're ready to do the scan," he'd said in his measured, almost clinical voice. "If you still want to be here, you should come now." She didn't even answer. She just grabbed her jack, and left. The dolphin in question, a large female named Kira, had been kept under observation for the past 3 days. The trainers had claimed she was off her food, lethargic, and showing signs of distress. But Maya had noticed something else during her brief visits. A slight swelling along the dolphin's midsection, a faint discoloration in her skin. Dr. Koenig had agreed to run a full-body X-ray, partly to rule out any medical issues, but also because Maya had asked. Inside the scanning bay, the air was sterile and cool, with the hum of machinery filling the silence. The handlers guided Kira gently into position, her sleek body resting in the shallow medical pool. She gave a low, almost mournful whistle as the scanner began to whir to life. Maya stood at the glass partition, heart pounding so loudly she was sure the others could hear it. She told herself she was being irrational, that the worst the scan would reveal was a swallowed piece of fishing gear or a buildup of stones in the dolphin's stomach. But then her mind flashed back to that night, the screams cut short, the sudden thrashing in the water, and then silence. Dr. Koenig didn't speak as the images began to form on the monitor. He adjusted a few settings, leaning closer to the screen. The outlines were fuzzy at first, the internal structures of Kira's body appearing as pale shadows, ribs, lungs, the gentle curve of her spine. Then, something else. At first, Maya couldn't make sense of it. An irregular shape lodged deep in the dolphin's abdominal cavity, denser than bone, darker against the pale wash of tissue. Dr. Koenig's brow furrowed. He clicked the mouse, zooming in. The shape sharpened into detail, a human femur. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She gripped the edge of the partition so tightly her knuckles went white. Her mind rebelled against what her eyes were seeing, the clean, unmistakable contour of a human thigh bone, still partially intact. Beside it, smaller fragments, curved rib bones, the faint outline of something metallic. "Is that?" Her voice cracked. "Is that a watch?" The image resolution left no room for doubt. A slim metal band, the kind worn on the wrist, rested wedged between 2 fragments of bone. Maya knew that watch. She had seen it countless times, glinting in the sun as her friend pushed damp hair from her face after a dive. The engraving on the back, "For Lila, always," had been a gift from Lila's sister. The room felt suddenly too small. She could hear the rush of her own blood in her ears. Behind her, one of the handlers murmured a low prayer. Dr. Koenig's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of finality. "We need to alert the authorities. Immediately." But Maya barely heard him. Her eyes were locked on the ghostly white shapes glowing on the monitor, frozen in that strange, suspended limbo inside the dolphin's body. A part of her wanted to believe there was some other explanation, that the bones belonged to some long-lost shipwreck victim, that the watch was a coincidence. But deep down, she knew. The pieces were too fresh, too familiar. She backed away from the glass, her chest tightening. The images felt like a betrayal, not just by the dolphin, but by the ocean itself. She had grown up believing the sea was wild but not malicious, that its creatures followed instincts untainted by human cruelty. Now she wasn't so sure. As the handlers secured Kira for transfer to a secure holding tank, Maya stepped outside into the damp morning air. The horizon was a dull smear of gray, the waves slow and heavy. Somewhere beneath that surface was the place where it had happened, where the night had turned from laughter to horror. She imagined Kira in those waters, gliding silently beneath the boat, the flicker of pale limbs disappearing into the dark. She thought about what the police would say when they saw the scans, how they would treat it like a case file, evidence tagged and numbered, the mystery boy, led down to forensics. But for Maya, it wasn't just evidence. It was Lila. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her from the spiral. A text from Detective Vega. "On my way. Don't let them move the dolphin until I get there." She almost laughed at the absurdity of it, waiting for a homicide detective to arrive and question a marine mammal. But the laugh never came. Her throat was tight, and her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Inside, the scanning bay door opened, and Dr. Koenig emerged. His face was pale, his jaw set. "They'll have to sedate her for removal," he said. "It's going to be messy." Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She kept her eyes on the water as the handlers guided Kira into the transport sling. The dolphin gave one short, sharp whistle, a sound Maya had never heard before. It wasn't playful or curious. It was defensive. And for the first time, Maya wondered if Kira remembered that night too. The summer crowd thinned as the afternoon shadows grew long, but the tension along the pier remained sharp enough to cut. Detective Rachel Mendez had been on dozens of missing persons cases, but this one refused to settle into any familiar pattern. The witness statements conflicted. The tide reports were inconclusive. And now, the more she learned about that trained dolphin in the resort's marine show, the more the puzzle pieces seemed to shift in her hands. She stood at the edge of the floating platform, where the marine biologists kept the dolphin between performances. The air smelled of salt and faint fish oil. Beside her, Dr. Ian Kellerman, our head trainer, adjusted his sunglasses and avoided eye contact. "You're telling me she swam here during the show, right into your act?" Rachel asked, flipping open her notepad. Ian nodded reluctantly. "Yes, she seemed panicked. She was in the water before security could even get to her." "And then?" He hesitated. "Then, Luna swam right to her. At first I thought it was a rescue behavior. She's trained to push struggling swimmers toward the surface." His voice faltered. "But instead, she dove, taking the girl down with her. I've never seen anything like it." Rachel studied him for a long moment. His posture told her he was holding something back. "What happened under the water, Ian?" "I couldn't see. She didn't come back up." The pier's boards groaned as the tide rolled beneath them. Somewhere down in the green water, the dolphin's sleek shape slid past. A sharp click echoed up, the animal's sonar pinging against the hulls of nearby boats. Rachel flipped her notes shut. "I want to run a full health scan on Luna. Ultrasound, blood work, the works." Ian's head snapped up. "What are you implying? That she ate her?" Rachel didn't answer. She didn't need to. The next morning, the lab's metal table gleamed under harsh fluorescent light. Luna rested in a shallow medical tank, tranquilized just enough to keep her calm. The marine vet, Dr. Sloan Hart, guided the portable X-ray arm into position. Rachel watched through the glass as the first scan appeared on the monitor. For a moment, she couldn't process what she was seeing. A tangled, ghostly shape inside the dolphin's stomach cavity. Sloan leaned closer, squinting. "That's unusual. The density's high for fish bones." Rachel's throat tightened. "Zoom in." When the image expanded, a human femur was unmistakable, its clean outline framed by a mess of shadows, scraps of fabric, something metallic. Sloane's voice was barely a whisper. "Those aren't just bones. There's a shoe." Rachel felt the room tilt, her fingers gripping the chair until her knuckles whitened. 9 days. 9 days since the girl had vanished, since the ocean had swallowed her, and all along the truth had been swimming in circles under the pier. By the time the sedation wore off, the Dolphin was back in her enclosure, her glossy black eye watching Rachel with unsettling calm. The animal's blowhole hissed in rhythm, othered, as though she carried no secrets at all. But Rachel knew better now. She stepped back, mind racing. It wasn't just an accident. She could feel it. Someone had trained Luna to respond differently to that girl, to take her, not save her. And that meant the killer was still here, somewhere on this very pier. The marine facility's viewing deck was silent, save for the occasional groan of the water pumps deep below. Avery leaned against the railing, eyes fixed on the ocean horizon, but her mind was far from the calm waves. She could still hear the diver's voice from earlier that morning, the tremor in it when he described finding the hair tangled in the intake grates. It had been the first concrete thing they'd found since Mara disappeared, a single human trace, pulled from a place few people would dare to search. Jordan came up beside her, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You're not going to sleep tonight, are you?" he said, half a question, half an observation. "I don't sleep much anyway," Avery replied quietly, taking the cup without looking at him. "But no, not tonight." He leaned on the railing too, following her gaze. "The ocean, it's not like the woods or a desert. It hides things differently. Things don't just stay where you left them." Avery's jaw tightened. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of." Below them, a dolphin surfaced, exhaling in a quick burst before slipping back under. The sound made Avery flinch. She'd grown up around these creatures, learned to read their body language like some people read facial expressions. But since Mara's disappearance, even the sight of them unsettled her. They felt implicated. They stayed there for a while in the salt-heavy air, the facility's dim lights reflecting off the water. Then Jordan's phone buzzed, breaking the fragile quiet. He glanced at it, then showed her the screen. "You should come." "To the lab," the text read. "We've got something." The lab was bright and cold, smelling faintly of disinfectant. Dr. Kessler, the marine biologist heading the investigation, was bent over a table. On it sat a sealed evidence bag, inside of which was a small, jagged fragment of something white. "This," Kessler said without preamble, "was caught in the Dolphin's oral cavity during the last medical check. At first, we thought it was a piece of shell or coral, but it's not." Avery stepped closer, her breath catching. "What is it?" Kessler's eyes lifted to hers. "Bone. Human bone." The words seemed to fall into the room with a physical weight. Jordan shifted beside her, but Avery couldn't move. Kessler went on. "It's too small for a complete identification, but based on its density and shape, we think it's part of a finger phalanx. There are microscores on it, scrape marks consistent with marine scavenging." Avery's stomach turned. "And you found this in the Dolphin?" "Yes. Ingested, though not recently, possibly weeks ago. We're running a comparative DNA test against Mara's hair. We'll know within 48 hours. No one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigeration unit. Finally, Jordan asked the question Avery couldn't bring herself to. "If this matches, does that mean the Dolphin?" Kessler cut him off gently. "We don't know the sequence of events. It's possible the bone was already in the environment and the animal ingested it after decomposition began. But..." He hesitated. "It's also possible the remains were in the water when the Dolphin was in the same vicinity." Avery stared at the bag. The fragment looked so insignificant, yet it carried the weight of everything they'd feared. When they left the lab, the night air felt colder. The facility was quieter now, the ocean beyond its walls deceptively serene. Jordan said nothing as they walked back toward the main building, but Avery could feel the unspoken question hanging between them. What exactly had happened in those final moments Mara was in the water? She thought of the last time she had seen her, laughing, tugging at the straps of her wetsuit, hair damp and curling around her face. Mara had always been fearless in the ocean. That fearlessness had been part of why Avery— She stopped the thought before it could finish. The next morning brought no relief. The DNA results were still pending, but the weight of possibility pressed down on everyone. The staff moved with subdued purpose, avoiding eye contact, speaking in hushed tones. Even the dolphins seemed to sense the tension, their usual chatter replaced by slower, more deliberate movements. Avery found herself back at the tank where Mara had last been seen. The surface rippled faintly, the same way it had that afternoon, as though mocking her with how unchanged it looked. She closed her eyes and listened. Water sloshing, distant gull cries, the mechanical heartbeat of the pumps, and somewhere beneath all of it, the echo of a scream she'd never actually heard but could imagine perfectly. When Jordan approached, she didn't turn. "They're saying," he began slowly, "that if it is her bone, it might explain why the trail went cold so fast." Avery's grip on the railing tightened. "Because there was nothing left to find." He nodded grimly. If the remains were dispersed, the ocean would have taken care of the rest. The words made her chest ache. She wasn't sure if it was anger, grief, or both. That night she stood alone on the outer deck, staring into the black water. A single dolphin surfaced nearby, its dorsal fin slicing the reflection of the moon before vanishing again. For a moment, she thought she saw something in the water's movement. Hesitation, almost. Guilt. But maybe that was just her own mind, trying to make sense of a truth too brutal to name. She didn't hear Jordan come up behind her until he spoke. "They called," he said softly. "The DNA's a match." The ocean stretched out bees. For her, vast and unknowable, and somewhere in its depths, the rest of Mara lay, beyond reach, beyond answers. Avery didn't move. She just kept staring into the water, as if by sheer will she could force it to give something back. The sun was setting over the marina, casting a soft orange glow across the water that shimmered like molten metal. For weeks now, the town had been living under a cloud of unanswered questions. Whispers had replaced conversations. Glances had replaced greetings. People avoided the pier after dark, and even the dolphin shows, once the heart of the local tourist season, had been canceled indefinitely. For Daniel, none of that mattered. He stood at the edge of the dock, wetsuit pulled halfway up his torso, staring at the narrow channel that led out to open sea. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of what he was about to do. On the bench behind him, the X-ray printout from 2 days ago lay folded, creased from how many times he'd handled it. Inside the stomach cavity of the dolphin they'd captured near the bay, faint but unmistakable, was the outline of something foreign. Not fish bones, not debris. Something long, thin, and metallic, curled just enough to be recognizable. The zipper pull from Ava's wetsuit. He'd stared at that grainy black-and-white image for hours before accepting what it meant. There were no more theories now, no more grasping at straws. Ava hadn't simply drowned, and she hadn't been swept out by the tide. The truth was far more brutal and far stranger. The Marine Lab had warned him not to jump to conclusions. Dolphins sometimes pick up and swallow objects from the ocean floor, the lead biologist had said. It doesn't necessarily mean— But Daniel had cut her off. "I know what I saw." Now, with the tide turning, he was going back to the site of Ava's last dive. Not for the police, not for the lab, for himself. He pulled the wetsuit fully on, secured the weight belt, and adjusted his air tank. The water was calm, but a deep kind of calm that felt unnatural, like a stage waiting for the curtain to rise. From somewhere far offshore came a faint, high-pitched whistle. It made his stomach tighten. He slipped into the water and began the slow, steady strokes toward the open channel. The light faded quickly as he swam, the surface darkening above him until the only illumination came from his wrist light. His breath echoed in his ears, a steady rhythm against the silence. It took 15 minutes to reach the drop-off, the place where the shallow seabed plunged into the deep trench. This was where Ava's dive computer had last pinged. He descended slowly, scanning the slope below. At first there was nothing but the swaying shadows of kelp and the occasional dart of silver fish. Then at 30 meters, he saw it. A flicker of movement in the distance, sleek, fast, and deliberate. The dolphin circled once, then twice. its movements too slow for hunting. It was watching him. Daniel's pulse quickened. He turned slowly in the water, making no sudden moves, the way the marine guides had taught him. The dolphin came closer, close enough that he could see the faint scars along its flank, marks that looked disturbingly like human fingernail scratches. Then it opened its mouth. Something tumbled out, catching the beam of his light as it fell toward the seabed. Daniel's heart stopped. It was Ava's dive knife. He kicked downward, reaching it just before it vanished into the sand. The handle was coated in a thin layer of white residue, calcium maybe, from being inside the dolphin's stomach for who knew how long. When he looked back up, the dolphin was gone. He scanned the darkness, but the water had gone still again. No shapes, no shadows, no sign that it had ever been there. And then, just on the edge of his hearing, came the whistle again. He turned toward it, but the sound seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, vibrating through the water, almost calling him deeper. For a moment, Daniel considered going after it. He'd come this far, but then he remembered the X-ray, the zipper pull, the faint scratches along the dolphin's skin. He clipped the knife to his belt, took one last look at the trench, and began the long ascent to the surface. By the time he reached the dock, the sun was gone, and the marina was swallowed in darkness. He pulled himself out of the water, removed his mask, and stared at the knife in his hand. It was proof. Proof Ava had been here. Proof she hadn't simply vanished. But it wasn't the kind of proof that would bring her back. Somewhere out there, in the depths of the trench, the dolphin still swam. And Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just an animal anymore. It was something else. Something that remembered. And it was waiting.